Hello, hope you're doing great. This is Maria Rajan, your friendly software engineer. And in this video, we're going to talk about how we can hold a string of characters using the char data structure in C++. In the last two videos, we talked about what arrays are and how we can make use of them in C++. And we now understand that an array variable is basically just a pointer variable that holds the address of the location that in turn contains a sequence of values of a particular data type. And we also know that a char data type is basically just another integer data type, because under the hood it's just storing numbers, integer numbers, and by means of using this ASCII table it translates the number to a corresponding character. For example, if you store the number 65 in a char data type, it gets translated to the capital A alphabet, English alphabet character. But only having the ability to store just one character at a time, like the alphabet A or the alphabet M, into a variable is very limiting. Because as human beings, for us, it is much more useful to have a data structure that can hold words, which are basically a string of characters, and sentences and paragraphs, right? Because that will be much more useful for us instead of just having the ability to store one alphabet at a time. This is where the char array data structure comes to our rescue. The arrays that we create using other data types such as an int array or a double array or float array or bool array pretty much work similar to a char array. The char array in particular, since it holds a string of characters, has certain nuances that we need to be mindful of. The following are the three specific nuances of the char array data structure that we are going to look at in this session. The first one is the importance of adding the termination character as the last element of a char array. The second one is making use of the overloaded insertion operator to print out all the elements of a char array as a string of characters. And the third one is a convenient way to create and initialize char arrays in C++. Alright, let's fire up our C++ editor and see these three things in action. So, as we have seen in our previous videos, we know that this is the syntax for creating an array. Okay, in this case, we are creating an array of the data type int, which can hold three values. And we are also initializing those three values over here. Okay, so this particular array variable called favorite numbers hold three values, which are 5, 7 and 3. Perfect. Now when we use the standard cout function to print the favorite numbers array variable to the terminal, we know that it is going to only print the address of the location where this sequence of values exists in memory. So this is something that we discussed in depth in the previous video, proving that array variable is basically just a pointer variable because it is, like holding just the memory address. So let's just compile and run this application and see, this in action. So yes, as expected, by means of using the cout function and this insertion operator, like over here, insertion operator, we are basically just printing the address of this particular array. Alright, so now we'll create a char array. The syntax for creating a char array is also exactly the same as how you would create any other array. All right, so you just mention the data type to be char instead of int or double or whatever you would use. And here, since we want this array to be holding a list of char variables, so we just mention the data type to be char. That's the only difference between this line where we are creating an array of integers and this line where we are creating an array of chars. So here, what we would expect right now is this variable, which is basically a char array variable, is supposed to print out the address of this array, right? So because that's what this integer array did, right? In this integer array variable, after we initialized it, when we printed it out, when we did a cout on it, using this insertion operator, we could see that this favorite numbers printed out the address of that particular array. So that means, here we have not changed anything, right? Instead of int, all we have done is only added char. That's the only difference, and we are calling the cout function with this insertion operator, and we are, trying to print out this array. Okay, basically this char array, we are just trying to print it out. Now, let's observe what happens. Let's compile and run this application now. We can see that instead of printing the address, it is actually printing TOM, that is all the elements of the char array, right? So this is the elements of the char array, right? TOM, and they are getting printed in sequence, TOM. This is done, because a char array is most of the time used to store something like a name or like a sentence and so on, right? So this insertion operator is overloaded to basically print out all the characters, all the elements that are present in your char array. So this is pretty cool, but what about these things, these trailing bunch of random characters that are coming in? Because our char array, which is name without termination, that's the name we have given right now. This char array contains only 3 elements, TOM, right? So it's supposed to, only print out TOM. But what are these additional, random symbols that are coming in? So that's a side effect of this insertion operator being overloaded to print all the elements of the char array. Because we know that this char array is basically just a pointer variable, right? This char array variable, it basically holds the memory address of this array, this block of memory in RAM, which contains these values in sequence, right? So this address, if you remember from the previous video, is basically the address of the first element in the array. So basically this name without termination array variable is only holding the memory address of this array, right? And then this overloaded insertion operator just jumps through the size of this particular data type, char data type being 1 byte. It just takes the memory address of this first value, it just adds 1 byte to it to get through the next memory address and so on. And it just keeps doing it. It just keeps continuing to do that until it actually finds a termination character. And if it does not find a termination character, it does not know where this particular, array of characters ends. That's something that we need to be mindful of. Even though we have mentioned that, this particular char array is supposed to hold 3 values, we have done that only over here when we initialize. This number, the number of elements in this char array, is not actually stored anywhere in memory. All right. So it's up to us as software engineers to mention where this particular word ends. Okay. And that is why we have to add this termination character at the end of our char array. This termination character could just be the number 0, or you can, use \0, in a single quote. Okay. And it's very important for us to add this termination character. Only when you have this termination character at the end of your char array, overloaded functions such as this insertion operator and, even us in general will be able to know when this particular, string of characters ends. Okay. So if we now compile and run this application, we can see that, it is actually printing only the elements of our char array, just TOM, right? So this character is not getting printed. And also it's important to know that the number of elements in this array is 4. When you're initializing your char array, we need to be mindful of this termination character. This is also a char data type, right? So it takes 1 byte in your memory to indicate that this is the last termination character. So that's basically how you print out a string of characters using the char array. Perfect. So now we have covered the first 2 nuances of this char array. The first thing being the importance of adding this termination character at the end of your char array. And the second thing is making use of this overloaded insertion operator to print out all the elements in your char array, to basically print out the string of characters that it holds. The last point that we wanted to cover in this session was a convenient way to create and initialize our char array. So this char array, as we have mentioned earlier, is used all the time to store names, words, and sentences, paragraphs, and so on, right? As a convenience for us, in C++, we have this option to make use of this, const char pointer. Basically what that is so let's just create a char variable. We have created a variable called favorite alphabet of the data type char, and it's holding a alphabet capital M, right? Now the important thing to note is, to initialize a char variable, we have to mandatorily make use of this single quote. Okay, that's how C++ knows that this is a char value. If instead of single quote, if you are using double quotes, you cannot initialize a char variable with characters which are inside of double quotes, because any characters one or more within double quotes will automatically be considered as a const char array. Okay, so this is basically, like, even though there's only one character within these double quotes, it is actually considered as a const char array, right? So since this is a const char array, it cannot be used to initialize a variable of the data type char, because this is not an array, right? So this, any characters within double quotes, is a char array. That's very important to keep in mind. And if you're talking about only individual char values, just make use of a single quote. So single quote means it's char, and double quote means it's a char array. That's the key point that we need to keep in mind when we talk about this convenient method that is available for us in C++ to create and initialize char array variables. So the syntax to make use of this convenient method is this. So it has to be a const. You can't, use it without const, because as soon as you put a bunch of characters within double quotes, like here we have put the string of characters Jerry, Jerry, within double quotes, this is automatically a const char array, right? Even when you hover on top of it, the Visual Studio editor is giving us what type it is. It is a const char of, and the number of elements that are there inside is 6. But actually, when you look at it, you only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are only 5 characters here, but if when you hover on top of it, it's saying, this particular char array, const char array, has 6 elements. The 6th element being the termination character. So basically, when you enclose a string of characters within double quotes, it automatically adds for you the termination character as the last character for you. It happens just automatically for us, as the convenience method, because this is used all the time, right? So here, even though we have not explicitly added /0, we have not done that. Even though we have not done it, it is added. It is, being this particular termination character, it is added at the end of this const char array. That's, you can validate it by means of looking at the number of characters in this const char array. Yeah, so basically, just by using this syntax, creating a const char pointer, you can hold this particular const char array, which is getting initialized by means of using this double quotes, instead of using this flower brackets and then like defining each character one by one separated by comma. This is really convenient, like it automatically adds the termination character, and also like you can just write it as words, like Jerry is chased by Tom, like you can even have a sentence. Okay, so that's it. I don't need to worry about how many characters there are there, and so on. It's all happening automatically. When you hover on it, it's, it automatically detects that there are 22 characters. I've written 22 characters, including the spaces, white spaces as well. And then like at the end, the termination characters are added, so that's why 23 characters are there. And like if we now print it out, that overloaded functionality is still applicable here, because this, at the end of the day, is just a const char array, right? So let's compile and run this as well, and and we can see that this entire sentence, Jerry is chased by Tom, is getting printed. So yes, hope this video was useful and gave you some insights into holding a string of characters by means of using the char array data structure in C++. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again in another video. Cheers!